So now we're into the meat and potatoes of the actual award ceremony here. And we're going to start off with the Razzies. And the first one is going to be our worst unit upgrades. So obviously these are units that we're looking back on, maybe some stars from 2021 or 2022. This is going to be encompassing like their 140 upgrades, maybe MA2s if they got those as well. Even looking a little bit at limit burst upgrades. So the number 5 here is Locke. This was a big rip for me because Locke is probably among my top Final Fantasy characters of any Final Fantasy. So it was him just getting like the upgrade to his re-raise. He gets an additional use. He got a little bit more evasion in his dream upgrade. His upgrade was absolutely awful, not what he needed. So he has basically been in the trash since he got his 140. Any thoughts totally here on Locke?
Yeah, no, they whiffed on his damage output. They have no slash res pen for him really existing in the kit. The defense pen is behind what all other slash oriented units have to get to really be in that bar. Obviously he's an evade unit, so he shouldn't hit as hard as some of the other units, but what he has is genuinely kind of unfeasible, particularly outside of light, where the dagger class has a couple things, but like not enough to really elevate them, and Locke suffers immensely for it. So yeah, definitely big L for what they decided to give him.
He needed that guaranteed hits evasion. He needed maybe a select 2. He needs a lot at this point.
Yep, absolutely.
Our number 4, you want to talk about this man here? I know you were a big proponent of him when he first came out.
Yeah, Golbez. Just a huge whiff on what they decided that they thought that he needed. Golbez has always been kind of in this this stereotype of a bulkier, bruisier mage, which Soul essentially is. Soul is what Golbez should have been. And so for Golbez, they gave him only 10% HP, which I don't care how big your base HP is. In terms of a 140 upgrade, that's usually not enough to carry you unless you have a bunch of impenetrable resistances, which he does not. They gave him 10 unit res on the MA2, but he's not a character known for like huge AoE and unit res attributes or any kind of damage reduction mechanics. So 10% HP, they give him 30% reaction block rate. Like reaction block rate, I'm sorry, like that's the last thing this dude needed. And Fang of Despair, the ability upgrade, was kind of nice in terms of the decrease of defense pen to that ability to lean into that like bulkier defense-oriented mage. But my god, he had so many other problems between not even just the bruiser perspective, but just like agility per se. It just didn't do well. Golbez just massive whiff. Yeah,
I think that ability was like my one copium that like, oh, he has such good defense, like maybe he could do something with this move. It's very whatever. Like it's not enough, especially where his passive, where he gets a bunch of the defense bonuses, is only just a couple of turns for him.
It wears off so fast. Yeah.
So yeah, he was never really that great, and the 140, especially being delayed multiple months, where now we do have a real bruiser mage like Soul. This guy just looks like nothing in comparison. So big rip for him. Number 3 is Oberon. He was actually one of the first guys to get a 140 right when the system launched. It wasn't very good. I think he got an upgrade to his Thunder Smite and not a ton else, like maybe some area res. Did he even get some AoE res or anything?
No. So he got 15 pierce attack, number 1. He got 20 initial AP, which is okay. I'll give him 20 initial AP.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And the Thunder Smite became a barrier break, a physical barrier break. So like all things considered, not the worst offensive upgrade, but he was kind of a one-trick pony in his survivability, that he just cast that barrier and that's it. That he even had some confusion in his AI in terms of like how to get to the proper defense pen levels. It's on a teammate buff that has a tendency to repeat. And so by the nature of that ability, it makes it tough to run him at that defense pen level. And then you just in general, there's not enough utility there. Like, yeah, not good.
It was also that barrier break came out into the game where you had elite barrier breakers coming in like Sephiroth, like Edward, it seemed like his defenses were worthless at that point. Obviously, barriers have come back a little bit at this point, and they seem a little bit better now with the current units that are in the meta. But yeah, definitely a tough year for Oberon, I would say.
I agree.
Number 2, Starlight Elena. Want to talk about her?
Sure, yeah. So hers, they gave her 20 slash res pen, which, you know what, I'll take. That's actually a decent one. But the other one was 10% dark resistance, which is okay enough for that matchup. And the I've tempered my resolve upgrade she got is some crit evade and some accuracy, which she did kind of need because she's not in a very innately accurate unit. Even with all that luck, and when you got into evade versus evade matchups, she would miss a lot. But that dark res, it's not enough for her to really compete in the dark versus light matchup per se. And even now, her versus dark is so much guaranteed hit. Sephiroth still completely shuts her down, with the exception of having to have Addison at her side for the nullify sure hit and the heal back and the courage and allowing Elena to have a different buff. There's so many other like things you need to put into place that 10% dark res really just like isn't enough for her to compete in that matchup. And yeah, I don't know.
She has seen a little bit of a resurgence here with Light kind of finally coming back into the picture with young Helena, but yeah, it was definitely, I'd say, a tough year for her as well, after kind of being one of the best units for a very, very long time.
It's that point. It's really a reflection of Helena the Black Rose, less so than Starlight Helena, where, you know, rising tide floats all boats. Helena naturally just has like a good light synergy with that vision card selection, and because Bahamut as that light vision card can allow you to have an evade vision card here. Addison Rae, as just mentioned, was almost always in that party. You very rarely see an Starlight Helena and a Black Rose Helena and someone else. Like, you usually had Addison there to buffer her. So I don't think that's a reflection of Elena or Helena so much as it is the others.
Definitely. So our number 1. Any guesses in the chat? Who is going to be the number 1 worst upgraded unit this year?
I didn't guess it. JB suggested it, and I thought about it. I'm like, holy shit, you're right.
Number 1, my girl Terra. It's a big rip for Final Fantasy VI. Big rip for Terra, the protagonist, at least for the first half of the game. And another one of my all-time favorites. So yeah, she got acquired AP on her dream upgrade, guys. Like a
mage starts with 50% of her AP. Got acquired AP.
Acquired AP for Terra. Pour one out. I'm gonna drink to that one, guys.
I'll drink to that. I'll pour another one in here, right here. Yeah, she got acquired AP. She got reaction block rate, and her barrier got upgraded to a general barrier, which quite honestly doesn't really matter, because if you're going against many barrier breakers, they're gonna break that barrier. Actually, there's even times where it's to your disadvantage to have a general barrier, where if you have a unit that's a magic barrier break, it'll apply to the general barrier because it counts as both. And so oftentimes that general barrier can inadvertently be broken by a character that's not one that you're really worried about. So yeah, everything about her was just awful, because there's a fun niche for her. The Esper niche is such a missed opportunity that they didn't do something to upgrade that passive, or do something to upgrade the 120 ability to say, like, when you generate your barrier, you also generate 50% evocation gauge. Like, just something. Huge miss, but I'll stop because I know this is your girl.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I really wish they had leaned into like the Esper angle. It would have given her like a unique niche without being like super overpowered or anything. And at the end of the day, it's just a very lazy upgrade. They obviously didn't really want to do anything for her. They've already made their money on her. So yeah, it is what it is at this point. But it is kind of sad because, you know, I absolutely love that game and that character.
Yep.
So some other ones that were kind of in the basket here, kind of being discussed and thrown around. Varouche. And honestly, I like looking at Varouche's upgrades. It's not like the absolute worst that I've ever seen. No. It's just that like where the character was starting from was so bad that he just needed more to like be able to have any sort of impact at all in the game.
Yep.
And he hasn't shown it to this point.
No, and we can kind of lump these dishonorable mentions together. I know for me, like a lot of the characters in the dishonorable mention, there's some characters that start off as unusable. We use that term, you know, from a balance perspective. And unless they do something to compensate to make them usable, no matter how good the upgrade is, it's still going to be not enough for me. That I don't care how good it is on paper. If the character is at here and the meta's up here and the character only moves 10%, well, like, I don't care how good it was. It's only 10% movement. Because they've done some good upgrades for characters that started off very poor. I'm going to talk about one of them in like 20 minutes. So they've done it before, but I know I personally lumped Velric in that same category as Varouche, like 2 units that were bottom tier. And I don't care how good these upgrades were. Velric's much worse. Wasn't even remotely close to viability.
They're kind of like the yin and yang to each other. Like Velric is the physical bruiser that can kind of like regen health and stuff.
Yeah.
And Varouche is kind of like the winds, like magical bruiser.
Yeah.
But yeah, and at the end of the day, they're both kind of whatever. So that is the worst unit upgrades, guys. Next category here is going to be units who fell off. So what this category is that these are units that saw very high pick rates at some point in 2023. And a high pick rate generally is something above 10 to 15% use rate in the top 100. And we'll show you some graphs of these as well. And at this point, these units are going to be, falling off considerably from that earlier point in the year. So our first guy that we're going to look at is Sorrow. Obviously, one of the first units that we got this year back in January. He kind of quickly made a huge splash in the meta. We had a big ice presence at that point, and he quickly came in and just shut that down. He was able to completely blow away snow and the ice missile archers. Very, very solid unit for quite a while. He got kind of a resurgence at the 3rd anniversary with Yuffie coming in. Had really good synergy with Yuffie's vision card. Still to this day is a very nice evade unit. Very good damage still as well. But, with Fire Evade falling off, even before Fire Evade fully fell, Ildira kind of came in and kind of stole some of his thunder. So here's the actual graphs of from WoTV stats. And you can see there very early, kind of in the April to May standpoint, he got up to a 15% pick rate in the top 100 on both attack and defense. And you can see now he is actually going to be like right around a 1% or less. So,
yeah,
huge falling off for this guy.
And it's tough. I actually don't know why. I honestly think part of it is just people moving on and not testing as much. There's certain characters that fall by the wayside. You never really revisit them because it feels like a waste of time. But there are some lasting things about his kit that I think scale very well still to this day. One of the big things, in addition to shutting down ice, was he was shutting down dark at that time, where Lucia had those barriers, the physical barriers. On that AoE Courage Dispels, the AoE barrier break, and his healing power down is at 60 is still one of the higher ones that you can get. His evasion rate hasn't gotten worse. And right now, the overall accuracy of the game is not as good as it was when he started to fall off, where you had your Bradleys, your Sephiroths, your, oh good lord, Ed Elrics. They're not really around right now. And so I think if you were to actually mock him right now, he'd probably surprise you in how good he does. Doesn't stop the fact that he absolutely fell off a cliff and went from meta-defining unit to absolutely nothing.
Obviously, he had that big kind of wind-fire synergy when he was first released as well with Glaciella and Sadali, which was a very solid team. People in the chat are mentioning that DQ Tact has announced their end of service, kind of in a long line of Square Enix games that they're shutting down at the moment.
Yep.
So I know that people are kind of saying, okay, is this collab ever going to come back? I feel like there's a lot of excuses they could still use to bring this one back. I feel like it was a pretty popular collab. It's a very popular entity over in the Japanese side. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that all hope is lost for that.
Not even remotely close. Dragon Quest is still one of the biggest franchises around in terms of classic JRPGs. I don't care if DQ Tact went EOS. Dragon Quest makes money. Like that, there's a demand.
Yeah, hopefully they bring it back, because I would love to see Zoma 140. I'd love to see Sorrow 140, and
absolutely
bring in bring in some new characters as well.
Yep, 100%.
So another unit that fell off is another one we just talked about. Why don't you talk about this one, Will?
Yeah, so obviously, like Helena's is a bit about the upgrade where it wasn't enough to push her, but really more than anything, it was just Sephiroth. Like, period, end of story. Where not only does he have two different kinds of guaranteed hit in his kit, but one of them is the remove courage. So he very easily could one shot her in many instances. Not only that, but they decided to give Dwayne a very favorable upgrade. The vision card they gave him too was also a form of courage dispel. I think it was another guaranteed hit, but I know that the combination of them made her nigh unusable. And light itself, in terms of outside of Elena, didn't grow at the same rate as dark. So when you're talking about those mono element comps, light versus dark, light was way behind for quite some time. And although she's Sword Red Mage, which is a obviously very strong group, as we saw from the vision card selection earlier, that in itself really isn't enough to really buffer her as a character, considering the alternative options. So yeah, that's kind of the nutshell if you want to show the cliff of the charts here.
Yeah, so
Just overnight.
a lot of light walls there, especially early in the year. So again, guys, this is top 100 view. This is essentially the top 27, 2,800 players, maybe 3,000. So heavy use up until the 3rd anniversary when Sephiroth came in and everybody pulled him because they were sick of seeing Elena for 2.5 years or whatever it was, 2 years.
Yep.
But
it's literally a cliff overnight. It's insane.
But you can see that the resurgence there in December coming back. She's been maybe like a 10% at this point. So,
yep. Which I think is good because she's still viable, but it takes a lot of conditions to work. But they work, just conditions.
Here, let me get the music back going again. There we go.
Yeah.
So number 3 is Velis. So obviously for folks who watched this last year, Velis was one of our top units last year. With good reason. He was absolutely a beast. He continued to be a beast for much of this year, actually. And he's still very good. But he saw a huge drop-off in his play, especially during that unit attack meta that we went through with Elia, with Soul, with others. And it really hurt him because, Soul especially blows him up with being a fire, obviously. But Elia as well could one-shot him unless you heavily invested into certain gear selections for him. So it really hurt his viability. The other thing was like the presence of haste TMRs that we've talked about before as well, that was one of his main niches. So you can see it here. He went from an 11 to a 13% use rate, which is very high actually for an ice unit. For a non-light dark unit, getting up into that 10 to 15% zone is pretty high. And you can see here he's now down to around a 1% use rate, maybe 2%. I forget the exact figure, but pretty low.
Yep. No, you covered it perfectly. I think the TMRs are a massive factor in that. He had a very unique strength of being able to enable teammates to lap enemy units. The fact that you could replace his utility via a TMR was just allowed for a lot more teams to not have to rely on him. And then in particular for survivability, as you mentioned, the unit resistance not being there means that as a support unit, they can bypass the tank hate and do a lot of damage to him. He couldn't survive often enough. And then even then, I know the last thing for me personally was the realization that he really only has 3 heals on his main job of those giant AoEs. Those usually are gone in the first fight. So from like a Guild War meta perspective, in terms of like him, okay, so haste is not a special, he's still a good healer. Kind of not really, because come the second Guild War fight, you're doing those arithmetician single target heals that are not nearly as strong with the power creep of the health pools in the game. And so all things considered, he just didn't have that same punch that he used to.
So obviously he had that huge dip at 3rd anniversary when Fire was very much in the forefront with Yuffie. He had a resurgence during the summer with Dialdo and kind of the Dark Golem synergy there. That was a team I used quite a bit. But then he had a huge falling off once Elia and Soul came into the game. So still a good character, though, at the end of the day, I think.
He's still an excellent character, quite honestly. Honestly, out of all the supports, he's still my top favorite support to reincarnate, I think. But that's a discussion for another day.
You want to talk about our number 2 choice here?
Yeah, so Alaya, the Geolai, who was a meta definer in her own right. She's of the gun class, which surprisingly is still one of the more competitive when you talk about the missile type attacks. She has so much in her kit. She was one of the first missile units to not only bring a ton of utility, but also a ton of damage. Usually there's some kind of trade-off when you talk about those two philosophies in a missile unit, but Alaya was not one of them. And she was part of our dishonorable mentions in terms of what they gave her for the upgrade. You know, it's really a whole culmination of things. It's ice. She's the second ice unit here, seeing that dip. So it's an element related partially. The second thing is the vision card, where it took forever for the Melnia vision card to come out. Irvine vision card was super late. You'll also talk about the maps that came out. There weren't a lot of great like missile oriented maps. And so, yeah, her overall effectiveness just didn't see the light of day, and she suffered because of it. That's kind of, that in a nutshell.
Yeah. Kind of going back to what we looked at in those first couple of slides tonight, and we saw all the emphasis on fire this year. We knew it was going to be a tough year for Ice when they had it so good for these first, 3 years of the game. So it was probably time.
Yep. Yep. It was.
That brings us to our number 1 selection here, and it is Dark Fina. Actually, a unit that is still being used quite heavily, even despite a massive fall off in her play.
I think this will surprise most.
But yeah, you look at the graph here.
Yeah, flip to the second chart before we go into the stats of it.
I couldn't believe the use rate on this unit, how much of the player base was using it. So 24% of the top 100 on attack, 38% was her high on defense, which is absolutely crazy.
Insanity.
Obviously, that would have been right around when Raph came into the game, and then an insane team, obviously, with Raph, Sephiroth, and Dark Fina was being used everywhere. So, yeah. Any thoughts on Dark Fina?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Dark Fina is just one of those characters that there was so much raise removal for a time in the game. And then, although she still has some great overall utility with the stop status effect, she's really the biggest threat when I think of that status effect that catches people off guard. She does have a great unit res in peril. I think the difficulty with a lot of people is still managing her with the devout sub job. That I know typically at top end play, she's a character that you would bow tie to like maintain spacing, be a little bit of a pseudo healer. But I know for most general ranks, that's not the case. So you probably see less effective Dark Finas on average being used. When you talk about now, what you can sub in for that dark team, well, Vivi obviously kind of de facto. Halloween Lucia is a very competitive other option that does some things a little bit differently. But Dark Fiend overall, I think, is just one of those units that there's just better options that people are willing to pull for. She's still a great unit, quite frankly. It's a pretty big drop off, all things considered.
100% agree that she's still a good unit. And it's really the lack of like unit resistance and unit defenses that killed her, along with Alaya just being able to not only herself delete re-raise, but give that to her teammates. Absolutely killed her, and that's why she really fell off. And that's what killed that team essentially this year, was Alaya in particular. I've actually seen her do very well against Soul, and to be honest with you, she can do a ton of damage against him. But her unit resistant peril is still very strong. Her limit burst still pretty strong as well.
Yeah.
So could still be a potential for this unit to come back and do something next year with some upgrades.
Yep, absolutely.
So this is kind of the marquee category for the Razzie portion, and this is all new units that were released this year, but just came in and absolutely flopped. They didn't live up to any potential. They didn't have a huge impact in the meta. And our number 5 here is a unit that we were both so hyped for. We had so much copium for, and it is Hio. Why don't you talk about Hio?
Yeah, I still have 1,000 Mind Spheres waiting to reincarnate him if I get brave enough. That's how excited I was to max him. He came in at a time where AoE res was a premium. It looked really shiny on paper. He had a couple really great, like select to remove re-raise. That sounds bonkers on paper. And so when you look at him, I think part of the thing that hurt him was the Great Sword, where we saw that job-based vision card synergy great start. He's the only unit that came out, and the vision card selection really wasn't there to weave him in. He has some odd things about him in terms of defense pen, with how you need to work in, vision cards like Dark Ifrit. Like, who uses Dark Ifrit as a vision card for defense pen? And he's got the teammate buff that kind of repeats. He's got some inefficiencies. We always talked about this with the accuracy, which was the big thing at the beginning of his release, that we were in an evade meta. You saw how strong Yuffie was. He just did not do well. He had no place in there. And by the time that kind of faded, we were already in the unit attack meta, where Hyo has really no unit res to stand a leg on. So the thing that made him great, he couldn't compete with at the time. And by the time he did have his time to shine, it kind of fell off. Now, I will say I used him like 2 weeks ago just for shits and giggles. He really surprised me how good he ended up being still. He's still a decent character, but an absolute flop. I've never seen it. He's in class match, in quick pick, in top 10 Guild War, nothing. Absolute flop.
Yeah, I do agree that there are certain things that have aged pretty nicely, and we have gotten things into the game that do help him out, like the Ultros Esper is something that we can now use to patch units that don't have a ton of defense pen innately. But 100%, this is a guy that I think a lot of people were excited about. Big hype on this unit. He just didn't deliver in the actual game results in terms of being any sort of impact on the battlefield. So big rip for Hyo this year.
Yep.
Number 4, Resol. Again, this was a unit I was hyped for. Like, supreme waifu. Like look at her, guys. And like, she was going to be like this the apocalypse
evade killer.
Yeah, like she was going to be a evade killer. Obviously, that fits into Wynn's niche with Clayshella, and she just couldn't do it. Like, honestly, we tried. Like, I don't know if you guys tried Invisipore as well. I'm sure some of you guys pulled her. We just weren't seeing the results. Like, in turn with her next to Glassy, even Glassy at 120 was performing better for us. And that's just kind of, where it ended up. She wasn't quite survivable enough. She wasn't quite doing enough damage due to lack of penetrations and whatnot. So she has a lot of good things about her. She has, she definitely has the bones there of some good things that she can do. She's just missing that like last couple of pieces where I think like if she gets like a really good upgrade, she could be right back into it. Like, we don't know what her MA2 is going to be yet. Maybe that changes our perspective, but at least for this year, I think she was definitely a flop.
I agree, 100%. She was one of those characters I remember at the time where the effective HP was there. And I thought it was really cool they gave her some good survivability metrics, because I think one of them was she had a counter ability that was an AoE buff. She had a couple different health regen abilities. She had, oh goodness, what was the other one here? I'm looking at it right now. Protected Shell. She had the blind status effect on her limit break, which if you make people miss attacking you, that's a form of survivability. That there was a lot of cool things laid in here, and the accuracy was there. We were in an evade meta, so you'd think 2 and 2 fit together. It never came together, but I do think she's one of those units that's a product of people not spending the time to test anymore. I think enough people passed on her, enough people got a certain impression of her. I think if you put her in a team right now, probably would surprise you more than you would think, particularly as a dagger unit with Zidane, who's kind of opened up some other doors and synergies. That I think she's one of those characters that probably just doesn't have the visibility to really show where her ceiling is, but no doubt that doesn't change the fact she flopped this year.
I have tried her a little bit with Zidane. The one thing that I think doesn't work so well between them is that Zidane has such long range on his barrier removal that she can't go in and then steal that barrier and give it to herself anymore, which is kind of one of the key parts of her survivability. So I don't think it would, as much as it kind of looks like on first glance on paper that they might work, it doesn't end up working as well in actual tests.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
I will say, though, that Rindell actually very much killed it with this unit in manual CM. So I know that she is a very good manual unit and will probably continue to be. So she does have that going for her.
Yep.
Number 3, you want to talk about this man?
Yeah, I really pushed for him. So I'll tell you a fun fact, guys, the story of how we got him to number 3. Roy was initially on our dishonorable mention, and we could not decide on who to put in for number 3 instead. And so it kind of dawned on me when I thought about it. I'm like, why is Roy a dishonorable mention? This dude absolutely flopped. Now, to JB's point, he was one of the best guild raid units in the game for quite some time. The magic chaining for fire in particular, I'll let you talk more about what that impact was. But from a PvP perspective, I remember at the time, the only survivability in his kit was a single self barrier. And we're talking about the time where Sephiroth and Bradley were prevalent, right? Well, this is literally piggybacking off Resol, where I'm just talking about she's got like 3 or 4 different things of survivability. Roy was a one trick in that regard, and the damage was never there to really classify him as a glass cannon. This dude was like a glass slingshot, regardless of the penetration. I mean, there's a lot that I thought you would have liked, and even accuracy-wise, I never found him to be like the hyper-accurate unit to bring to a fight if I really needed him to. Even in our analysis, when it seemed like that could be the case, it never really came to fruition, which is shocking considering that he was a glove unit, so wasn't Kefka. Fire came out with Kefka, that magic synergy, the glove synergy, it just wasn't there, and I've never seen him used anywhere else in auto PvP.
This list is like so painful to go down because I was so hyped for all of these units. I spent so much viz on all of them, and it's just like a who's who of like, who did I pity and like how much dollars flew out of my pocket on those,
all of them,
on those banners. So this is, for all you guys in the chat, this is like cathartic at this point, just kind of looking at these guys. But yeah, 100% like in a PvP perspective, I honestly tried very, very hard, even when the map bonuses were there for him. He just couldn't hack it. The defenses weren't up to snuff. He would just get blown off the map. From a PvE perspective, though, probably the best unit in the game this year from a guild raid perspective. Mostly on the back of Gumi really amplifying magic damage this year and really upping the damage potential for magic units. And him just not only having a 4-hit, but also having 3 hits innately in his kit. He's an amazing guild raid unit, the best, as long as Gumi continues to promote magic damage. So,
yep.
Number 2.
In the chat, Ito Manpre already called it. Rugia, number 2.
Oh, yes. Wow.
Rugia's coming. He knew he was coming. And someone else in the chat, I won't say who, already called her number 1. So we'll reveal it. But yes, Rugia number 2. Do you want to kick things off? Do you want me to?
This is your boy, so you should take this one.
Yeah. He no, flopping never came to fruition. I quickly came to actually learn something about the game because of Rugia, to be honest. His main AoE attack was a decrease of evasion rate, and it kind of dawned on me that without going against an evasion team, he really didn't offer anything else from an offensive utility perspective. At the time, he was a very hard Skahal counter, to be honest, with his follow-up attack. He does have kind of an anti-magic niche that I thought there might be some upside from there. Obviously, with Melnia coming out down the road, I thought there could be too. JP actually saw some half-decent usage out of him, which I actually have no idea how, because I have consistently gone back to test him with all different kinds of iterations of builds, because I love his initial build of the AoE buff. I think it's the AoE regen. I thought that was a great little self-sustain for an Earth team without a dedicated healer at the time. And even on his sub job, he's got 2 different potential attacks to play with. One is a CT up boost, which we know from Bradley how amazing that is. And the other one is an insta heal that I'm like, okay, this dude's like a multifaceted unit. You can build him a bunch of different ways, and he's actually still to this day, like, I think the most accurate unit in global. I think percentage-wise, he is the top most accurate unit. If he's not number 1, he's like number 3. And so I thought there was so much you could play with, and I don't know what it is. We said it was defense pen initially, but we've gotten away from the defense meta in a sense. Like, I really just don't know what it is. I think it's, I don't know. I'll stop.
I mean, it kind of like part of his issue is what I've been seeing in all missile units, though. Like, a lot of their modifiers are lower, their attack values are lower, their penetrations are lower, and they just do less damage. And it's like, okay, there's all these select attacks, there's all these diamond AoE attacks. They always get clipped or die anyway. What's the huge value in using them? And and that's something that you talked about quite a bit this year. So I think that's kind of, the proof is in the pudding, in terms of the amount of missile units getting used this year.
Right. I'm loving chat at the moment too, trying to guess what number one is, because some of them are sort of right, but they're not exactly right.
Number one flop this year, Floppy Resnick.
Has to be. Has to be.
The new name is Floppy. Resnick the Floppy.
That's a great nickname.
So again, this was a surprise unit for Global. I remember Intern Kuhn kind of leaked it accidentally in one of the thumbnails or something, and people were pretty excited for this. Obviously, an Earth Evade unit coming in, and kind of within that, the Lunar New Year festival, and very cool looking unit. I still think she looks great. Has some decent abilities, especially with the limit burst, with the unit resist imperil. Again, just not evasive enough, not accurate enough to really make a huge impact in the game. Also, a victim of timing, where she was coming in right before the 3rd anniversary. We already knew that Sephiroth was coming in. We knew that Evade was, at least her style of Evade was probably dead at that point. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this unit?
Resnick the Hoppy died so Halloween Lucio could live. They saw everything that went wrong with this unit, and they were like, oh, we know what we did. And they fixed it for Halloween Lucio. Because there's so much overlap. She's an evasive unit. She's got a bunch of healing power down on her kit, which was ahead of its time. She's got the Dispel Protect. She's got the Reduced Counter Chance. She does have a Dispel Auto Re-Raise on one of her AoEs. There's so much there. Her limit break is the healing power down of 70. In addition to the healing power down of 50 on the Thrice the Acrobat, which is a triple hit. There's so much there that lines up on paper. We even knew statistically when she came out, the evasion rate was something that had to really be fine-tuned, because it wasn't all that great.
Right.
And Earth at the time was a good slash-oriented team. They were a good evasion-oriented team, so we had copium for her. We're all the elements are there for it to work, and it never worked. And not only was she bad, but the vision card, when we rated the vision card, was the worst job-based vision card they'd ever released.
I was just about to say that.
You talk about both of those in conjunction. Not only was she not a good unit, but the vision card didn't elevate her most vision cards do, which the Halloween Lucio came out and they're all right, we're gonna make a busted ass job-based vision card for him, which they did. They made a great job-based vision card, and for her, not so much.
So I do agree with the folks in the chat that she is a pretty good guild raid unit as well. She obviously has the imperil that I talked about. She has 3-hit chaining, so good guild raid unit for sure. But this is definitely more of a PvP angle, as we kind of established there with Roy. I do think that there is some copium for next year, that maybe there is some Earth Evasion coming back. We know with the Nier collaboration, 2P is coming in as an Earth Evade unit. Resnick, that's going to line up pretty closely to when her upgrades could potentially come in if they decide to do another Lunar Fest this year.
No, see, that's where I'm mad at Gumi. That's why it's on my top 5 worst. If they're not going to upgrade Shadow Links on Ice with the winter, why would they upgrade Resnick the Hoppy for Lunar? That's why I'm so down on Gumi on my top 5 worst. I don't see it happening.
I guess we'll see what happens, but yeah, I can definitely see it either way.
Yep.
So some honorable mentions here, and I know at least a couple of these were mentioned in the chat. I feel like we're going a little bit long here, so we won't devote too much time to them, but probably my number one out of this list is Jaden the Celebrated.
Yeah.
I do want to say that this guy came out within weeks of Bridal Alaya, and he's just nowhere on this. He's not even in the same ballpark as that unit. It's not even close.
No.
It's really a joke when you look at the two of them, and you look at the cost of them being the same. It's really disappointing unit this year, and is going to continue to be disappointing because all of the Pierce meta is going physical at this point, and I'm sure Volk coming in will also be physical. So I think it's a big rip for Jaden the Celebrated.
I'll echo that. I think he's the biggest of the misses. And I think it's because they misallocated his ability on the AoE. His Magellant's Raid, the giant AoE, is 50 healing power down. The thing I was most excited for was for the Dispelling Descent, which brings the enemy unit hate to 0. That to me is such a game changer in PvP. The fact that he doesn't use that ability nearly often enough, because Magellant's Reign is the damage priority, particularly now with all the unit res being way jacked up, that I think that's the biggest miss, where he just spams Magellant's Reign for healing power down. And you're like, cool, I could have thrown Hio in there and like done that. I could have thrown like 10 different, I could, Resnick the Hobby can do healing power down. Like, it's really not like as special as it made it out to be, and big miss. Now, Grinsback, I hate, sorry, strong word, but total flop. Squall, fine, but for Final Fantasy VIII's main unit, the mainstay of that banner, miss. Not a bad unit, just a miss. And Lena, honestly, not a bad unit, but Ayaka's too similar. Lena, though, I've used her a ton the past month. I am very impressed with Lena, but just not special enough. It's a flop.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. We will say that it doesn't mean that they're a terrible unit. Like Resol, Hio, I don't actually think they're terrible. But if you actually look at their impact on the meta this year, non-existent. So
exactly.
That is our flopped units for this year.